I'm sure you've heard about letters of recommendation, and they are very important. Yes, they are very, very important. So we have to talk about them. Okay. So the Common App is going to ask you for 2 letters of recommendation. And there's a couple different things here. First of all, let's talk about whom do you ask for a letter of recommendation? So I do usually recommend that students ask at least one teacher in their school. That's usually a pretty solid bet. English teachers have a tendency to be quite good at writing for obvious reasons, but it doesn't have to be an English teacher. It could be any academic subject teacher, whether it's history or math or science or English, any of those academic subjects. Usually you want at least one letter of recommendation from a teacher like that. And I would recommend that you ask a teacher you know has like really good spelling and grammar, because sometimes teachers do not. And so if there's a lot of like spelling errors or weird things in emails that you've seen from these teachers, not the person, but maybe they are, it's okay. Do keep in mind you are not allowed to see these letters of recommendation. Usually schools will have a program like Naviance or other software where the teacher can submit the letter of recommendation to the counselor, and then the counselor sends it to the college for you. And like a lot of teachers will give you a copy of it so they can be like, look at the nice things I said about you, which is lovely, but they don't have to do that. They're not required to show you. So try and get one academic teacher. And then I usually have my students ask an extracurricular teacher or a non-academic teacher or coach for their second letter. So it could be your theater teacher, a coach of yours for a sport, your art teacher, any of those lovely people who do things that are not like the core subjects of like English, math, science, whatever. Usually those 2 are pretty good. Now, you can also ask in place of one of those people, maybe a community leader or somebody you know really well, like maybe a member of your faith community or someone you do community service with. Those are also excellent people to ask. I would not ask family members if you can avoid it, or like if a family friend has like a really cool thing they're going to write about you and that feels like the right thing for you to do, go for it. But usually I want those letters to come from somebody who's seen you work in some capacity, whether it's at a faith community, an extracurricular, a coach. Coaches are great. Like music, art, theater teachers are great. Those are all super awesome people to ask. So that's a good idea. Now, it is possible you will need a third one. So athletes usually must have at least one from a coach. Usually that depends on the program specific requirements. And people submitting art portfolios usually need a letter of rec from an art teacher. So if you're one of those people, make sure that you ask that coach or that art teacher well ahead of time. So speaking of well ahead of time, okay, here's what we're not going to do. All right. We are not going to beg teachers to write us a letter of recommendation 24 hours or 48 hours before the application is due. No, we will not be doing that. Not even a week. I want you to decide the person that you want to ask well, like months in advance, ask them and give them enough time to do it, and also give them a deadline. So when I ask people for things like this, I say, hey, I would really love a letter of recommendation from you because you're one of my favorite teachers of all time for obvious reasons. I would really love to have this all in by October 1st so that I can focus on completing the rest of my application. Giving someone a deadline is a really good way to like help them get it into on time, because what you also don't want to do is have it be 48 hours before the deadline and you know it's not in and you're like, help me, I need a letter of rec. That's not what we're after. Now, these letters of rec are usually not due at like the stroke of midnight like your application is. Sometimes they can be sent in a little bit later, but let's not bank on that, shall we? Let's make sure that everything is in well ahead of time and that you are prepared and that you don't have to worry about these things. So if you have questions about like what type of teacher you should ask for a letter of recommendation, your college counselor is somebody to ask about that. Just make sure you're asking them well in advance of all the work they have to do, because they're going to be super busy. So make sure that they have enough time to actually sit down with you and talk about the best options.